Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast, where we dive into books, stories, people, and tons of different topics. My name is Kevin O'Keefe, and today, let's learn about Greek myths. This is going to be an introduction, an overview of Greek myths. I'm laughing because there's no way you can cover this topic in less than 20 minutes, which I will attempt to do. But just know, previous episodes, we've had tons of different stories and different genre of stories. We've tackled fairy tales, which are stories that involve magic and fantasy and usually have some type of moral. They're set in medieval times, generally speaking, kings, queens, even talking animals. We've covered Aesop's fables, again, that genre, often short stories, definitely involving morals, and yes, talking animals as well. And then we also covered American tall tales. And the tall tales genre is definitely hyperbolic, exaggerated stories about larger-than-life characters. And in the case of American tall tales that we dived into, it was all about America's history, westward expansion. And these stories, although based in historical fact, in terms of the story that it revolved around, the characters were fictional, but ultimately, Greek myths are something that still exists today and go back a long, long time. So this genre that we're going to talk about, a myth, is unique with all the story genres that are out there. Why? Because they involve gods, goddesses, they explain the origins of our world around us. At the time, they were believed to be true by the culture that told the stories, and they were often, and this is the case with Greek mythology, definitely connected to worship, religion, all the rituals that they passed down, and yes, they were told verbally before they were ever written down. And it's ultimately, this huge intersection between religion and storytelling and mythology. So we will dive into everything about Greek myths, its origins, everything that has influenced today's culture, Western civilization, their words, topics, phrases, names, companies. It's infused in our everyday, so much so that people take it for granted, these stories. We will wrap up the podcast with the top 10 myths, the top 10 Greek myth characters, and yes, the top 10 creatures / monsters / beast. So where did this all start and when? Well, it was 1600 to 1200 BC, the end of the Bronze Age. We talked about this in a previous episode with the Spartans, and this time period was very famous because a lot of civilizations ended up disappearing because of these sea people. Mysterious sea people then ended up conquering all these established kingdoms and empires. But suffice it to say, in the Greek city-states, and remember, Greece as a country really never existed until recently. They were all independent little towns and cities that they called city-states. Well, this intersection of religion, stories, and actual real history begins with this gentleman Homer, which, believe it or not, we don't even know if he was a real person. But suffice it to say, we've also learned that maybe he was blind, but he definitely lived around 750 BC, and he was this poet who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. We really don't know much about his life, and he probably didn't invent the stories, but he was definitely the first one to put it down on paper. Now, keep in mind, this is really important to understand. It's around this time in classical Greece that you're actually having the words put down on paper. You have an actual language. You have an alphabet. Still survives today. You can go to Barnes and Noble and read these books that this gentleman put down. Most people consider the Iliad and the Odyssey to be the earliest surviving examples of stories in Western literature. Not the first, but certainly the most famous. So, the Iliad, again, you can argue the first quote-unquote Greek myth, again, that survives in terms of being written down. It tells the story of the Trojan War that focused on the hero Achilles, and then the Odyssey, which focuses on Odysseus and his long, dangerous journey back home from the war. Both of these stories will be future episodes, but let's just say again, the intersection of religion, stories, and history is right here, right now with these stories. Why history? Well, the city of Troy, archaeologists found it. It did exist around this time period, and apparently it was through this evidence of these excavations, it was destroyed by fire around this time period of 1200 BC. It's now not a real city where people live. It's an archaeology site, but it's in modern-day Turkey. And yes, was the story ultimately true in terms of history? No, a lot of historians don't believe that. The Trojan horse, the superhero Achilles and his feats, and certainly all these monsters with Odysseus coming back from the war. No, but ultimately the religious aspect of it is huge with a lot of people. Alexander the Great, in my podcast episode on him, his hero was Achilles. So, in terms of the origins, continuing after Homer as a foundation, the other Greek writer you got to know is Hesiod. Why? He lived about 50 years later in 700 BC, and he wrote the poem Theogony. And what was this? This was the origin story about everything beginning with chaos and all of the family tree of the gods, the origin of Zeus, the origin of everything, all the famous gods and goddesses going back to the Titans and the Olympians were told in this story, Theogony. From here, it's important to know this as well. Plays and theaters were big. And this is, as we go through to today, thousands of years, why ultimately all the Greek myth stories have been changed and retold. And it begins with these playwrights, Sophocles, Euripides. Well, they retold the stories on stage, and they kept the myths alive throughout Greek culture. And then ultimately down the road, it was the Roman poet Ovid, who was huge in terms of preserving all the stories that's still around today. He lived around 8 AD, and he obviously didn't invent any of these myths, but he collected them and he retold them for a Roman audience. So obviously they were preserved and not lost. And his most famous work that he put together was called Metamorphoses. It's a long narrative poem that pretty much put together a lot of these myths and allowed a lot of transformation, which is a huge theme throughout a lot of these stories, showing how the gods and the humans and all these creatures changed forms literally and figuratively. So now that we know where all these Greek myths began, where they came from, let's talk about the actual Greek myths. And when we start, we have to start with Theogony, the actual beginning, and chaos. So it's not chaos like confusion. We still have that word today, but no, this is an empty space. Nothing existed. And from chaos came the first beings. There was Gaia, the earth, Tartarus, the deep underworld, and Eros, the force of love and creation. Well, Gaia gave birth to Uranus, the sky, and together they produced the Titans, some of the powerful early gods. One Titan, Cronus, ended up overthrowing his father Uranus and ended up ruling the universe, but there was a prophecy. Yeah. He ultimately, as the prophecy goes, was going to be overtaken by one of his sons. That son was Zeus, and yes, he was. It's an unbelievable story about swallowing people, swallowing gods, being raised by goats, and ultimately fighting a huge battle. Yes, this huge battle was the Titans against the Olympians, Zeus against his father Cronus, and Zeus ultimately becomes the king of kings with all his brothers and sisters. They end up on Mount Olympus, and this is the origin story. So from here, you got to know all the gods up on Mount Olympus, and we'll lay out everyone right now. First, there's Zeus, the king of all kings, the god of sky and thunder. He's the ruler of the Olympians. He controls storms and lightning. Hera, she is, yes, the wife and sister of Zeus. It's a long story, but let's just say she's the goddess of marriage and family, and she's very jealous. There's Poseidon, the god of the sea, brother of Zeus. He controls the ocean and earthquakes. There's Demeter, sister of Zeus. She is the god of harvest and food and agriculture. Athena, the goddess of warfare and wisdom, and the patron goddess of Athens. Really important. Athena ended up becoming the goddess of Athens. Athens chose her over Poseidon after she gifted the city the olive tree. Then there's the twins, Apollo, the god of music and healing. Then there's Artemis, the twin sister, the goddess of the hunt and the wilderness. Both children of Zeus. Then there's Ares, the god of war and violence. There's Aphrodite, beautiful Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, another daughter of Zeus. Then there's Hephaestus, the god of fire and craftsmanship, metalworking. He was like a blacksmith. And yes, he's the son of Zeus and Hera, and his famous weapon is the hammer and the anvil. Then there's Hermes, the messenger god, another son of Zeus. And then there's the 12th god. And you got to remember this, 12 gods up on Mount Olympus. And this is a controversy. Yeah, the original god was Hestia, sister of Zeus. She was the goddess of home and tranquility, peace, everything being wonderful. But she stepped aside. Apparently there was too many tension conventions, arguments, things happening, drama on Mount Olympus. So she didn't fall from power. She just stepped aside and she gave up her Olympian throne to Dionysus, the god of wine and good times. He was another son of Zeus, and he became extremely popular in Greece. So from the origin story in terms of how Zeus came to power, and again, remember, the city-states, they all worshipped and had religious ceremonies revolving around all these gods. And again, it was about explaining why there were thunderstorms, right? It's because Zeus had his thunderbolt up there and he was angry with the mortals, the humans down below. Why is it that there were earthquakes? Well, it was Poseidon and his trident that was stirring things up. And yes, ultimately, the origin story then goes to men and women. And what was it? Well, it was Prometheus and his brother, Epimetheus. They were tasked to make human beings. Prometheus was responsible for that. Epimetheus, he created the animals. Well, initially the animals, as the origin story goes, in Greek mythology, the original animals had more talents and skills than human beings. So Prometheus said, I gotta get fire for human beings. But Zeus didn't want to give up the fire. He said, this is exclusively for only the gods. And not to give away the whole story, but let's just say Prometheus got in trouble. He stole the fire. He got punished by Zeus. And ultimately, he needed to punish human beings. You see, everything was perfect about human beings in the beginning. But with this beautiful woman who came down and just had lots of curiosity, her name was Pandora. And again, future episode, but she opened up this box. And I think you know what happened. Then there was Demeter. Well, Demeter, she had a daughter named Persephone. And Persephone just wandered too far away. And this fellow by the name of Hades, who is the brother of Poseidon and Zeus. We did not mention him before because he's not up on Mount Olympus, but he's got an important job. He's the ruler of the underworld. And yes, his special power is that he can be invisible. And he's got this special helmet, just like Poseidon's got his trident and Zeus has got his thunderbolt. Well, Hades basically kidnapped Persephone, Demeter's daughter. Demeter was so upset. And why was this important? Because she was the goddess of harvest, of food, of plants. And she went into a big funk. And it wasn't until Zeus was able to convince his brother Hades to return Persephone. But there was an agreement. Persephone could only stay up in the real world for 6 months of the year. And this is the origin story of why we have seasons. There was Arachne, the weaver. Well, she could weave clothes, but she was too pompous. She got in the way of Athena, talked too much, and she ultimately got turned into a spider. Yes, and there was Theseus and the Minotaur, this half-man, half-bull monster that lived in this labyrinth. And talk about a story. Oh boy, let's just say the Minotaur was in trouble, and Theseus, although he was victorious, he made one crucial mistake. And you talk about a myth that has a sad ending. It's definitely that one. And along with another sad ending, you got Daedalus and Icarus. Let's just say you can't fly too close to the sun, my son. Sorry for the pun. You've got Oedipus and the riddle of the Sphinx. You've got Atalanta and the golden apples. But you can't talk about Greek mythology without mentioning Hercules, which otherwise known as Heracles. Definitely the greatest hero in Greek myths. He was another son of Zeus, but a regular mortal woman as his mom. So that gave him incredible strength, but he had a whole life filled with struggle. He was too powerful. He became ostracized throughout his life. And to atone for a lot of his sins, he had to complete these 12 labors. He had to kill some beast, famously killing a lion, outsmarting some magical creatures. He had to go to the end of the known world and even into the underworld and returning alive. Most people would actually argue that Hercules is more famous than Zeus himself. When you think of Greek mythology, Greek myths, you think of Hercules. So let's wrap up our podcast with some top 10s. The top 10 most popular, yes, based on my opinion, most popular Greek myths. Let's start with number 10, Arachne the Weaver. Number 9, the story of Echo, this nymph that was cursed to only repeat the words of others. And yes, we all know about Echo, Echo, Echo. Number 8, the story of Narcissus, the youth, the kid who fell in love with his own reflection. And we know, yes, again, connections to today. A narcissist comes from this story. Number 7, the tale of Demeter and Persephone, the origin story of our seasons. Number 6, Jason and the Golden Fleece, this quest by Jason and the Argonauts for this magical fleece. Number 5, Theseus and the Minotaur. I can't pronounce his name. I can't. Number 4, Daedalus and Icarus. Oh my goodness. What a story of father and son. Number 3, Hercules and his 12 labors. And the top 2 most popular Greek myths, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Tying for number 2, Prometheus and Pandora, and the original origin story of the Titans against the Olympians. Number 1, you got to believe it all began with Homer and his story of the Trojan War and the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's number 1. Along with the stories, we now got to count down the top 10 most popular characters, myth characters. 10, Hades. 9, Ares. 8, Apollo. 7, Poseidon. 6, Achilles. 5, Odysseus. 4, Hercules. 3, Athena. 2, Hera. And of course, number 1 is Zeus. Now let's go with our monsters and our creatures. 10, the Nemean lion, who went up against Hercules. 9, Pegasus, this winged horse that was born from Medusa's blood. Yeah. Number 8, you had the Cyclops, of course, the giant one-headed beings in the Odyssey. Number 7, the Hecatoncheires, original Titan, along with the Cyclops. Yeah, 50 heads and 100 hands. Can you beat that? Number 6. Well, apparently you can, because you've got a 3-headed dog that guarded the underworld of Hades. That was Cerberus. Now, number 5, you got to throw in the Gigantes, these giants who actually, together with the Hecatoncheires and the Cyclops, original Titans. But Zeus, to make it clear, Zeus ended up freeing them from Tartarus, the underworld, and they ended up fighting against the father Cronus. 4, this Python, this giant serpent that was slain by Apollo at Delphi. 3, you got the Sphinx, who is this body of a lion, a human head, and was all about giving riddles. The top 2, Greek monsters, creatures, and yeah, we got a tie again. For number 2, we got Chimera. Talk about strange. This body and head of a lion with a goat's head growing from her back, and like this serpent or like this dragon for a tail. And yeah, some myths could say she could actually breathe fire. Coming in also at number 2, you got to talk about Medusa. I mentioned her before. Talk about someone who was interesting. Snakes for hair. And when she looked at you, you would turn to stone. As the story goes, that some myths actually talk about her as being a beautiful woman who ended up being cursed by Athena. And coming in at number 1, we got 2 of them. Yeah, I know I'm cheating, but you can't deny that these are the 2 most popular. Hydra, who fought against Hercules. This serpent, you cut off her head and 2 grew back. And yes, we'll put this guy up on top. The Minotaur, who ended up fighting against Theseus. He was half man, half bull. He lived in this labyrinth, and he lived on the island of Crete. To wrap up our podcast on Greek myths, one more ranking, and we're going to keep it to 5. As I've talked about so often, we overlook this, but the stories of Greek mythology, there's so many words, phrases, topics, subjects that are part of our vernacular, which is part of our everyday life, our culture, our references, our language. Again, you get the idea. So I'm going to call this our top 5 Greek myth legacies. Number 5, the Atlas. We never talked about this, but you talk about someone that was punished by Zeus. He was originally a Titan. And yeah, his punishment was to hold up the sky. So today we have plenty of atlases out there, which you know is a book of maps. Number 4, an Odyssey. Yes, named for that story. An odyssey is a long journey or quest. Number 3, someone's Achilles heel. Yeah, even though you have strength and you've got a lot of skill sets, everyone's got some weakness, and that's your Achilles heel. Number 2, we got to go with Herculean. Based on Hercules, if you've got a task that's huge and big and you need a lot of strength to do it, it's a Herculean task. And of course, number 1, it's got to be Pandora's box. Don't do that. It's like opening up Pandora's box. If you do this, you're just opening up Pandora's box. And not to give away the whole story, but when humans, as the myth goes, as humans were punished by Zeus, they were given everything that was horrible and nasty and mean, but there was something left over in that box that kept men and women going. And I'm not going to give it away. Future episode. Before I leave you, categorize this, put this under, did you know? How about this? Nike, the very famous sneaker company. It's from the Greek goddess of victory. Amazon, are you kidding me? The Amazon River, the Amazon rainforest. And yes, the company also took its name from the Amazon River. Well, Amazons come from Greek mythology. They were this legendary tribe of these fierce warrior women. Well, in 1541, this Spanish explorer, Francisco de Ayala, he ended up being attacked when he was exploring the river by all these indigenous Native American women warriors. So he was reminded from the Amazons, from the Greek myth. So that's where the name came from. Yes, the trident, right? The gum, of course, that comes from Poseidon's trident. Ajax, the cleaning company, you've heard of it, right? That comes from Ajax the Great, the Greek hero of the Trojan War. And did you know hygiene comes from Hygeia, the Greek goddess of health and cleanliness? Nemesis, you're my nemesis. That comes from the actual goddess, from that name of justice and revenge. And museum, it's from the Muses, the 9 goddesses of art, learning, and inspiration. The museum was literally a place dedicated to the Muses. And finally, we got to wrap up with the Titanic. That famous ship that tragically went down by hitting that iceberg. Well, it got its name from the Titans. All those gods that ruled before the Olympians, before Zeus took over. And of course, they were huge, they were big, and that word, Titanic, not just the ship, but it references anything that's enormous and powerful. Thank you, everyone, for taking this journey with me, learning all about Greek myths and their stories and characters and references that still continue to today. Until next time, reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Always helps the podcast. Until next time, have fun and keep learning.